Welcome everyone. This is an absolute beginner's tutorial in Entity Framework. We are going to create a point of sale for a coffee shop to introduce CRUD operations using Entity Framework. And initially it's going to be a very simple and very small application just to get you started. But the idea is to keep adding functionalities to this app so that we can introduce more complex topics in Entity Framework. So in this first lesson, let's create a project. We're going to create a console application. So in Visual Studio, choose Create New Project and then Console Application. And in this video, it's looking like I'm choosing ASP.NET Core Web API, but I'm not. I'm choosing Console Application. And in the next window, in the Configure Your New Project window, choose your project name and where it's gonna live. And I like to create very clear names. So the name for my project will be coffeeshop.pointofsale.entityframework so that it tells exactly what it is. And I'm using my study projects folder for that. Here I'm choosing the latest version of .NET Framework as of this recording, which is .NET 7. And that's it. The project is created. And in this first lesson, instead of jumping straight into Entity Framework, let's create the menu for our application. And for that, we're going to use a library called spectre.console, which has many interesting components for dealing with console applications in C#. And it provides a great user experience and it's very easy to develop as well. So if you don't know it yet, I think you're going to get addicted to it once you use it for the first time. So for that, we need to bring in a NuGet package. So on the top menu, choose Tools and then NuGet Package Manager. And in the sub menu, choose Manage NuGet Packages for Solution. That will bring in a different window where you're going to search for the spectre.console library. So click on Browse and in the text field, type Spectre. And it's the first in the list, spectre.console. Then choose the project, which is only one at the moment. Choose Install and I accept. Once that is done, we can start writing code. So let's create an enumeration with the menu options that we're going to have in our app. So let's write enum. The name of this enum will be menu options. And the options will be add product, delete product, update product, view all products, and quit. Then we're going to use Spectre to collect the input from the user based on those menu options. So we're going to say var option equals nconsole.prompt, and we're going to pass a new selection prompt, which has as a type the menu options. And then we're going to call a method called title, which will contain the title, obviously. And we're going to say, what would you like to do? Then we need to add the choices, and the choices will be every choice in the enumeration. And I forgot to add the quit option, but we're going to do that later. Now, I don't want to spend too much time explaining the code related to spectre.console because that's a library. And you can find the documentation for this library in the links below. But since the objective of this tutorial is to teach any framework, I'm not going to spend any time talking about how this library works. Now we're going to create a different layer. We're going to right click on the project and choose Add and Class. And we're going to name this class Product Controller. And that's where the interactions with the database will live. And for now, we're going to leave it empty. First, let's clean it up a little bit. We're going to use the semicolon beside the namespace, which reduces one line of indentation. And we're going to remove all using statements. And you can do that by clicking on this brush icon, which amongst other things removes unused usings. So it's a bit tidier now. We can go back to the program.cs class. And here we're going to create a switch statement based on this option variable where I'm storing the option chosen by the user. So here I'm saying switch based on the option, and each case will be one of the options. And in the first case, menu options dot add product, we're going to call a method in the product controller called add product. And we can't forget to use the break statement so that we can break out of the switch statement. And also we need to bring in the coffeeshop.pointofsale.entity_framework namespace so that we can use the product controller class. And obviously I haven't created the add product method or any method in the product controller. Hence we have this squiggly red line. But let's write something similar for each of the options. Once that's done, I can hover over the method name and choose the target icon and then click on generate method add product, which will do exactly what it says. And let's do the same for all the other methods. And these methods are being created in the controller class. And to finalize this lesson, let's create a loop that will contain this menu. So this is going to be a while loop, which will depend on a boolean called is app running. While this boolean is true, the menu will keep running. So we need to move all of the code in the menu to inside the code block of the loop. So I copy and pasted it and then deleted from outside of the loop. So let's test the application to see how it's working at the moment. I can see the menu and I can select using the arrows, which is a very nice user experience for a simple console app. And if I choose one of the options, an exception is thrown. And that's because when we generate a method using Visual Studio's refactoring tool, it's created throwing a not implemented exception by default. So that's it. If you have a bit of experience with C#, this lesson should be straightforward. If you're just getting started with C#, this lesson might have been a little bit advanced since we use loops, methods, creating a new class, an enumeration. So these aren't absolute beginner concepts in C#. So I suggest you go have a look at those topics first, since Entity Framework isn't a topic for absolute beginners. But in the next lesson, we will start using Entity Framework. Now we're going to start working with Entity Framework itself. And for that, we're going to create a class called Products Context. And the purpose of the context is to provide a connection to the database. And it serves as a link between the application and the underlying database. Let's use the new namespaces, adding a semicolon after the namespace, and we'll clear the using statements that aren't being used as well. And this class needs to inherit from the DB context class, which is a class provided by Entity Framework. Inheritance is a concept in object-oriented programming. And if you don't know what it is, basically it means that this class that I'm creating, products context, is based on another class. So it's going to have a parent class and it needs to implement its methods. And it's important to dive deeper into the context of inheritance before you advance in Entity Framework. But for this beginner tutorial, you don't need to know much about inheritance to be able to follow along. The context represents a session with the database and it allows you to query and manipulate data. So to declare that a class is inheriting from another one, we need to add the colon and the name of the class that's being inherited, which is DB context. And we can use this squiggly line that we can see here to install the package for Entity Framework. So we don't even need to go into the NuGet package manager. We can download it directly from the code. So we can choose find and install latest version. And we need to add the namespace. And in our case, it's Microsoft.Entity Framework. And then we need to declare as a property of this product's context class, a DB set field, which also comes from Entity Framework. And in summary, it represents a database table. In our case, it will be a table of products, which we haven't created yet. Now notice that DB set needs a type to be declared. and we have this product type with this squiggly line. And this is because this product class wasn't created yet. And this product class that we're going to create will serve as a model that represents a table in the database. So it has all the characteristics of this table. So let's see how we're going to create that. So the class was created, and we are also cleaning up by using the new namespaces and getting rid of the unused usings. And these models are comprised of properties that represents the columns in the database table. And for now, we're going to keep this model very simple. We're going to have only 2 columns, the ID, which is an integer, and the name, which is a string. Next, we're going to use the onConfiguring method to declare the connection string for the database. And this is just one way to configure the DB context. And what's happening here is we are overriding this method. So this is a method that exists in the base DB context class. And we're going to call the useSQLite method of the options builder object. But for that, we need another NuGet package, and that's the anyFramework core.sqlite. And we need to pass the connection string into this method. And the connection string for SQLite is very simple. All you're going to say is data source equals the name of your database. So we have everything we need in code to create a database, but we need another NuGet package. And this is the package that will allow AntiFramework to create a database. And that's the Microsoft.antiframeworkcore.tools. And once that's done, you can go to the tools in the top menu and choose NuGet Package Manager and Package Manager Console. And here we're going to run the command add migration with a custom name. And I'm just going to call it initial migration, but it's up to you how you want to call it. And your migration gets created, and we can see that there is a new folder on the Solution Explorer with 2 files. And these are the initial migration file and the product's context model snapshot. So migrations in any framework, they're just a way to manage changes in the database over time. So it allows us to evolve our database schema incrementally and helps us to keep track of it. So if you go into this initial migration class, you can see all the changes that are in this up method. We can see that a table is being created and all its properties and characteristics. We're not going to touch it in this tutorial, but this is a way to do minor adjustments to your migration whenever you want. And if we examine the product's context model snapshot, we can see that it contains the current state of our database schema. By comparing the current state of the entities with the snapshot, any framework can identify which properties have been modified. And sometimes we will want to roll back any changes that we've done with the database schema. And the snapshot will allow us to revert the schema to its original state. So now what we can do is to run the command update database. And that's what will actually create a database for us. We can see in the Solution Explorer that the file was created. If you right click on that file, you can choose Open Containing Folder, which will take you to the file in your root folder. And there you can open your database, and I'm using the DB browser for SQLite to execute this file. And when that's open, we can browse our table, which at the moment is empty. And that's it. Our database is created. And in the next lesson, let's see how we can insert data into it. Now we're going to do our first operation using AntiFramework, and that's going to be to add a product to our database. First, we're going to get the product's name from the user, and we're going to store it in a variable called name, and that's inside the add product method. And we're going to get that input using the ANSI console.ask, which will be a string passing the string product's name. And that is a class provided by the Spectre console library. Then we'll create an instance of the product's context. And we need the using statement since the context is an unmanaged resource and it needs to be disposed of. And that's what the using does. Then we need to use the add method from that product's context object. And this method expects an instance of the model to be passed. And in our case, the model is the product. So we're using the keyword new to create an object, product, which is the name of the model, and populating the object with its properties. In this case, we just have one property, which is the name, and we don't need an ID because by default, Entity Framework auto increments properties with the name ID. As we can see here in the initial migration file, you can see that there is an annotation, SQLite : auto increment. Then we need to call the save changes method of the context, which will persist the changes to the database. So let's see if it works. If I choose add product, I get asked the product's name. And if I say cappuccino for a new coffee type, I get an error. And it looks like it can't find my table products. And that's because by default, Entity Framework looks for the database in the bin folder of the application, which is where the executable for this project lives. So we need a modification so that it finds the database in its correct folder, which is in the same folder where the CS_proj file lives. So let's grab that folder by right-clicking on the choosing copy full path. Then we're going to click on the arrow next to the project's name and choose the project's debug properties. And that's where we change our working directory. So we need to paste the path that we have just copied, just removing the last part, which is the CS_proj file name. And you're going to see that a new folder was created in the Solution Explorer, and that's the properties folder. And this folder has a file called launchsettings.json, which has information about launching the project. And we can see here that there is a working directory key value pair with the new path that we configured. With that, let's test again. Let's choose the add product option, choose the product's name, which will be cappuccino, my favorite coffee, and let's see if it was recorded in the database. So opening the database with DB browser, click on browse data, and we can see the cappuccino record was inserted with the ID of 1. So that's it. In the next lesson, we're going to learn how to get the data from that table. To get records from the database using Entity Framework is incredibly easy. In the getProducts method, let's use the using statement using var_db equals new products context, and then we're going to create a variable called products that will be assigned to the db.products.toList. So we are using the db set products and calling its method toList. And we're going to change the method's signature so that it returns a list of products. And we will return the products variable. And we can simplify this toList call. We don't need to pass the product since the model is inferred. Now to visualize the list of records, let's create a new class which will contain the user interface. So we're going to call it user interface. We will tidy it up as usual. And we're going to make this class static since it doesn't contain any state. It's a class that's available to us at all times. It doesn't need to be instantiated. Then we will create a method that's also static. And this one won't return any data. The objective is just to show the product table, hence the name. And it expects a list of products as a parameter. And we're going to create a new instance of the table class, which belongs to the spectre.console, and store it in a variable called table. Then we need to declare the columns of this table by calling the addColumn method, passing the header of the column. And in our case, one of the columns will be the ID and the other will be the name, since these are the two properties of the product model. Then for each product in the list of products, we're going to print a new row. And we do that by calling the no surprise addRow method of the table variable. And the addRow method takes strings as parameters. So we are passing the ID converted to string and the name, which is already a string. Then we need to call the ANSI console.write and pass the table object. And I'm also going to call the console.readline so that it doesn't print and continue. It waits for the user to press something before continuing. And we will add a console.writeLine method to say that the user needs to press a key. Then we can go back to the menu in the program.cs, and in the view all products case, we're going to store the list of products coming from the controller into a variable, which we'll call products. And we will pass this list of products to the show product table of the user interface class. So pretty straightforward. So let's run the app and see if it works. And we can see that our list of coffees was correctly printed. But since our console doesn't get cleared after I choose an option, I'm going to add that call in the end of the show product table method so that it clears the console before opening the main menu again. So that's it. Entity Framework makes it very straightforward to get data from the database. And in the next lesson, we're going to learn how to get one record based on its ID. Now we're going to work on getting one product by ID. So in the corresponding method, let's use the using statement using var_db new products context as we did before. And we're going to store the product in a variable. And to get the product, we're going to access the products DB set, calling the single or default method, passing the ID of the product. And we use this method because there will be just one matching element, hence the single, and we don't want the application to throw an error if there are no records, hence the default. So if there are no records, what will be returned is null, which is the default value for custom types. Now, since we're passing the ID to the single or default method, we're going to change the signature of the getProductById method. So this method will return a product and we'll have an integer ID as a parameter, and it will return the product that it got from the database. So again, very straightforward. Entity Framework makes it very easy to get one record from the database. But getting that input from the user will be slightly more complicated. So we're going to add an extra layer for this application, which is the products service. We want to keep our controller very lean with the only purpose of connecting to the database. So any processing of data will be done in this service layer. So let's create the product service. And we're going to create a method that will be responsible for presenting the options to the users and collecting the input. So we want this method to be available at all times without needing to instantiate the product service. And the name will be getProductOptionInput. Then we'll get a list of all products, calling the product controller.getProducts. And we will grab all the names of the products using the select method on the products list and calling the toArray method. So essentially from the products list, I'm just selecting the names of the products, which is an expression made incredibly easy by LINQ and any framework working together. And once I have that array, I can create the options for the user. So as we did in the main menu, let's call the nzconsole.prompt, pass in a new selection prompt. And we will create a title as well and add some choices. And the choices will be the array of product names. Now the users will pick the product by the name, but I'm going to pick the products by the ID. So I need to be able to find that ID based on the name. So to do that, I need to use the single method again. And this time I'm using single instead of single or default, because we know for sure that that name will always exist since it was grabbed earlier in this method. And to access the ID, I'm just adding the .id after the parentheses. So now that I have the ID, I can finally call the getProductById in the controller and return the product, since this method has as a return type the product. So I'm creating 5 variables here, and I could optimize this code and use less variables and less steps, but I just wanted it to be very clear and simple since this is a beginner tutorial. Now we finally have to go to the menu, and in the view product option, we're going to store the product in a variable, calling the getProduct option input in the product service. Then I need to create another method in the user interface to show a product, since at the moment that class only has a show products method. So if I invoke a method that doesn't exist, I can generate that method using Visual Studio, and that's what I'm doing here. And once the method is created, let's see what it's going to contain. I'm going to use another component of Spectre Console, and that's going to be the panel. So I'm storing an instance of the panel class, which comes from Spectre Console in this panel variable. And then I need to pass the string with the contents of the panel. And I need to add product as a parameter in the method's signature. And I'm going to use string interpolation and verbatim string with the $ and the @ so that I can have each property in a different line. I'm also going to have a header for this panel, and I need to instantiate a panel header object, passing a string, which will be product info. And I'm also adding some padding for formatting. Then I will render that panel using nzconsole.write, passing the panel. And again, I'm going to wait for the user to enter a key before going back to the main menu, and I will also clear the console. Back in the menu, I can't forget to pass the product to the showProduct method in the user interface, and that should be it. Let's test it. And I can select the product using the arrows in the keyboard. And once I choose a product, I can see the panel with the ID and the name. Very simple so far, but effective. Since I said that I want to keep it very lean, I'm going to remove this nzconsole.ask from the addProduct method. And this method will now expect a string. And now the name input will be collected somewhere else. And that's going to be in the main menu. And of course, we need to pass the name into the method. And that's it. Now our controller has one responsibility, which is to connect to the database. There's no input being taken inside the controller. Next, let's see how we will delete a record from the database. Deleting a record from the database, again, will be a very straightforward process with Entity Framework. We will create an instance of the product's context using an using statement. We will also modify the delete product method's signature so that it accepts a product as a parameter. And we will call the remove method in the DB set, passing the product, and save the changes. And that's it. What we will add though is a new method that will handle that operation in the product service. And that will be an intermediate between the controller and the menu. So it will be a static void method where we will store the product as a variable, and that product will be grabbed from the method that's in the service, get product option input, and then I'll pass that product into the delete product method in the controller. And back in the menu, I have modified the code so that it's now calling the delete product in the product service class. And that should be enough. Let's test the application. So I'm going to add a couple of products again. Cappuccino and latte. And I can see both of them in the list. And if I choose delete product and delete the latte, now it disappeared from the list. So everything is working as expected. Now let's just do some refactoring so that all the operations are being handled by the service. So I'm going to add a method for the add product operation. And I'll copy the code currently in the menu. I'll call the service from the menu. And I'll paste that code into the service. Then I'll create a method in the service to get products. And I'll copy the code from the menu. Paste it into the service. And back in the menu, I'm going to call that method in the service. And I'm also going to make the get product option input as private, since it's only being used by this class. Then I'll create a get product method in the product service and copy the code from the menu. Call the service from the menu. Paste the code into the service. And this product service invocation isn't necessary anymore since we are in the service itself. So let's test just to make sure that we didn't break anything. I'm adding a product, adding an espresso, and it was correctly added. And if I delete the cappuccino, cappuccino has disappeared, so everything works as expected. In the next lesson, let's see how we can update products. Usually, updating is the hardest of the CRUD operation. It's the one that has the most complexity. But since our model has only 2 properties, implementing the update will be very straightforward, even from a user interface perspective. In the update product method, let's change the signature so that it accepts a product as a parameter. Let's again create an instance of the product's context. And then we will simply use the update method, passing the product and saving the changes. In the product service, let's add a method to handle the operation. Then, as we did in the delete method and on the get product method, we need to present the user with the list of products and get the user choice of product that they want to update. After that, we can grab the code that has the nzconsole.ask and put it in the update product method. And this will be assigned to the name property of the chosen product. So we don't need to create a new object. We're going to use the object that was chosen by the user coming from the get product option input. And we will simply modify the property that we want, which is the name. And then we'll pass that product as a parameter to the update product in the controller. Then in the menu, let's call the service instead of the controller. And that should be enough. Let's test the application. So I have these 3 coffees. I'm going to choose Americano and I will update its name. I'm going to call it Latte Americano. And the name was updated as we expected. In the next lesson, let's see how we can add a property to the model. We're going to include the price in the product model. I know I've said it many times, but I have to say it again. Adding a property using Entity Framework is incredibly easy. First, we need to go to the model and add the property that we want. And in this case, it's going to be a property with a decimal type and which we'll call price. Then we will click on the Tools tab and Package Manager console. Then we'll add another migration using Add Migration and a title of our choice. And I chose Add Price as a title. And then we need to use the Update Database command. And that's it. Let's check on the database if the column was created. Right-click on the database file and choose Open Containing Folder, and we can open our database using DB Browser. And we can see that now our table has a price with a default value of 0.0. After this, we need to change the user interface to cater for the new property. First, when we insert a product, we need to get the price input from the user using the same nzconsole.ask as we did before, but this time it will be of the decimal type. And this time in the insert product method, we need to create a new object, a new product object. And instead of passing just the name into the add product in the controller, we will pass the entire object. Obviously, we need to change the signature in the controller so that it accepts product instead of a string. Then in the show product table method, we need to add another column to the table object. And that column will have as a header, obviously, the price. And we also need to pass the price argument to the add row method. And we can't forget that it needs to be a string, since the add row method only gets strings as parameters. And let's make it a little bit more readable by creating new lines for each property. And then we can test the app. Let's add a new product. I get as the name and the price. And when I visualize it, I can see that the new product has the price. Now we need to change the update product method. And this one will be slightly more complicated. We're going to use ternary expressions to determine the product name and the product price. So first, I'm going to add a binary prompt from spectre.console. And for that, I need to use the confirm method. What this does is it provides a yes or no option to the user and it returns a Boolean. So that's the condition for the ternary expression. If the Boolean is true, the element after the question mark will be assigned to the product name. So we're saying that if the Boolean is true, the product will be assigned to the new name, which will be asked using the ask method. If the Boolean isn't true, the product name will be assigned to the product name, which means that it's keeping its current value. So let's recap, because it can be a little bit confusing, especially if this is your first time using ternaries. I'm assigning a new value to the product name, and this value will be dependent on the Boolean that's returned from the nzconsole.confirm. If it is true, the value after the question mark will be assigned to the product name. And that is the new name grabbed from the ask method. If the boolean isn't true, the product name will be the current value of the product name. And then we'll do the exact same thing for the price. So let's test to see if the update functionality works. If I choose a product, I get asked if I want to update the name. If I choose Y, I'll get prompted to input the new name. And if I choose N, I won't get a prompt to update the price. Now notice that there is a Y in between parentheses in green. And that means that if you just press enter, the Y will be the default option. So essentially the boolean is going to return true if you just press enter. Let's try again just to confirm. So I'm going to update the Pablo coffee again. This time I won't update the name. And I'll say yes to the price. And I update it to 5.5 and the 5.5 value is recorded. So that's it. This is the end of this intro series to Entity Framework. And this is just the beginning. Very soon I'm going to release the second part of this series, which has more complex functionalities. We're going to add categories of products and the ability for the user to add orders as well. Right now we can only do CRUD operations with the products, but since this is a point of sale, we need to support sales of those products. And for that, we will need to learn about one-to-many and many-to-many relationships. And we will also learn how to generate reports about these sales. Don't forget to check our website where we have a complete roadmap for C# developers, from simple console applications to full stack development with JavaScript frameworks, Blazor, MVC, Razor Pages, and cloud development with Azure. We review all projects that you submit to us on our dashboard. We have a huge leaderboard, which at the moment has 700 users from 75 different countries. And the content is free and will always be free. Thank you for the feedback. I'm going to release a video with all the chapters in one single video, and this one without music for you guys that don't like music in the background. And please keep giving me suggestions and feedback. I make these videos for you guys, so I'll always listen to what you have to say. If you like this video, please subscribe. It's very helpful, and I'll see you in the next course. And I'll see you in the second part.